Jessica Crow. I'm the founder of Apogee and the host of Change Leader Insights. And I'm so excited because today I have here with me Julie Lee. Julie is a keynote speaker. She's the head speaking coach for The Relevant Speaker. She's a podcast host. She's the author of two books, one being a children's book, one being called I See You: How Compassion and Connection Save Lives. And I'm so excited to have her here today because what she and I are going to talk about is something that resonates with me deeply. And I can't wait for this conversation. Julie, do you mind just sharing a little bit about yourself and then how you sort of got into this space of talking about leadership, mental health, the importance of connection? You've got a speaking, you talk a lot about the connected leader. And so I just love to learn more and share with the audience, about you and then how you kind of landed where you're at and the importance of being a connected leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me on the podcast. It's an honor to be here.
Definitely.
Got into this space kind of a different way. I guess all speakers have their own story of how they get into it. I think most of us don't. That's not really what we dream of being as a kid. I don't know. Maybe there's some kids out there that do. But for me, I was in a really toxic work environment actually
Mhm.
when I was 21, and my mental health completely fell apart. I found myself in the bathroom stall experiencing my first panic attack as I had just worked myself into the ground trying to get a leader to like me that I could not seem to measure up to their expectations. And I had a different leader that really stepped in and humanized the situation for me. I went from, like losing confidence to tie my own shoes. I was not keeping food down. I was not sleeping. I
Mhm.
really mentally broke in this work culture and specifically under this leadership. And I was able to be successful as I had that leader step in. And I remember specifically a voicemail she left me after a day that felt like a failure and I'd left early. I remember the voicemail and it said, "Julie, we are going to get you back on your feet. We're going to do this one day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time if we have to, but we're going to get you back." And
Wow.
that experience really changed how I viewed leadership and influence in general. And from there, I started a podcast, just like yours, called ICU. And that then led to a book contract for the book you mentioned, I See You: How Compassion and Connection Save Lives. And that led to more and more speaking outside of my home. It's always fun to podcast, but it's even
Yeah.
better for, I don't know, for someone like me. I love being with a live audience. And at first, the podcast was really highlighting stories of when people felt seen in all walks of life, when tragedy struck or when things got difficult, and the way that people being willing and ready to lean into the uncomfortable, to say
Mhm.
something, to be there, to touch the shoulder, to make eye contact during really challenging times, how that saved and transformed the experience in their life. And then from there, I really grew to have a path. I started speaking in education. My degree and my background is this, I actually was a second grade teacher, so
Yeah.
very different. And so I started speaking to kids, and it was like the more I spoke to kids and then to teenagers, I would do assemblies. I really realized, as much as I want to help these kids and speakers have a place for kids, absolutely, I felt discouraged as they would come and hug me and talk to me afterwards
Mhm.
because I just felt like I have 1 hour with these kids. The
Mhm.
people who are the people that have the
The most time with them. Yeah.
time on their side to develop these kids. And I thought, those are really the teachers and the parents. And so that then changed my focus into working with adults.
Yeah.
And so I focused a lot on education and administration. And that then led to also to corporate, which has been a really neat thing. It's been fun as I published an ICU message for kids. You
Yeah.
mentioned the children's book. It's called Broccoli Punzel, A Girl with Extraordinary Hair. It's pretty fun. And it's really been fun to speak at corporate events and have like CEOs come and buy just as many copies of the kids book as the self-help leadership book,
Yeah.
just because I mean we're grandparents, we're parents, we're neighbors, and we want this next generation to lead out well, to lead out with compassion, to value human connection both in our homes and in our workplace. So that's been a neat thing
I
to
love that
watch,
story.
to
Yeah.
see that, heart really come out in those audiences. So, yeah, I love what I do. I love and as you mentioned, I also am head of coaching at a coaching program I actually went through about 3 years ago. Under my speaking coach was Ty Bennett, who's a very successful leadership speaker and writer, and that program was so helpful for me as I was already keynoting, but needed to understand the market better in the industry. And they then brought me on as partner and head of coaching at Relevant Speakers. I love helping other people build their speaking business the way it's benefited me and my kids.
That's fantastic. I love how it's just been this kind of one thing after the other in terms of the opportunities that have come your way. And that's just such a great way that you've been able to build on and expand your reach and connect with people in the way that you are. Especially, I love how you mentioned that who the captive audience, right? Parents and teachers have kids as a captive audience. That's why I care a lot about the corporate space too, because the leaders and organizations, their captive audience is their employees. And so who better to teach and train on this topic, not only because of the positive or negative influence they could have on their employees and colleagues, but because of we spend so much of our time at work, and having a place that is fulfilling and positive not only makes for so much better experience, but also contributes to higher organizational performance. And the adaptability, thinking in the context of change, the adaptability and the resilience of the people that work there, because change is happening all the time within organizations. It's how the strategy is getting executed. And so being able to connect the dots between what you're saying and being a connected leader who brings that humanness back, and then how that can influence and advance the organization, is such a critical dot connecting moment, I think, for listeners. So tell me a little bit about, what does it look like to be a connected, influential leader? I mean, you've shared how the leader who helped you come back from your breaking point, and now you are teaching and coaching and speaking on this topic. What are some examples of, if I'm a leader of a team, or I'm on a project and I sort of cross-functionally need to, lead and bring people together, what does that look like for me?
Yeah, and I have a couple different keynotes and workshops where we talk through this. The connected leader is the one that I usually will give first. And it's really broken down into three things we focus on, which is I see you, I appreciate you, and I trust you.
Mm-hmm.
And those are, and then we talk about tools around that, asking for specific examples of ways you can do this. I love that, because when I speak, I mean, we've all had a speaker get up and tell an inspirational story, and it's great, but it doesn't feel like it relates to us.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, some of the most maybe I'll share some of the tools that I've seen be the most impactful for leaders. A big one is under the pillar of I trust you. And we talk a lot about how often leaders struggle to ask for help from their
Mm-hmm.
people.
Mm-hmm.
And we can tie this into, because I know you're big on change and resilience and adaptability, which I am too, and the way that human connection plays a role in that and helps soften the blows of big change and transition.
Mm-hmm.
For leaders, so often, like I said, we have this front where we want to have the answers, and we're
Mm-hmm.
so quick, I think, often to be really willing to accept, or sorry, to give help.
Mm-hmm.
And it is harder to accept and ask for help from our people. And the problem with that is it really hurts trust between the leader and their people.
Mm-hmm.
The example I'll sometimes use is, I mean, it's like the leader that says, yeah, like mental health is a priority at this organization. We've gone through a lot of change. You've been through a lot. Your family's been through a lot. Absolutely, you should use your time off and your vacation days, take a mental health day, all of that. And they never do it for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So
It's
modeling those behaviors is an important way to,
huge.
yeah, to not
Modeling,
only
and it gives
show it,
silent
yeah,
permission for
yeah,
everyone else that
yeah.
that you mean it, because if you don't practice what you preach, it's really hard to trust that it really is okay for me to take time. Uh, an example I think of a lot is, I remember I was at a speaking gig, and I had a neighbor watching my kids, and I remember I came home And I just said to this neighbor, "Hey, I'd love to repay the favor sometime." Not like a tit for tat situation, but just, "Hey, I'd love to take your kids off your hands sometimes. You can go do whatever you need to if you need to go work, if whatever it is." And the response she gave to me, maybe you could put yourself in my shoes for a second, is, "I could never ask you to do that. I wouldn't want to be a burden."
Oh, wow. After she's like just watched your kids, like that just shows where her mindset is. Wow. Yeah.
And often when I'll share that story, there's like an audible gasp in the audience. And I'm like, "Put yourself in my shoes." How often do we talk that way though? And as
Mm-hmm.
leaders, when we talk about it, like, "Oh, no, 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 like I can't ask you for help because I'm supposed to be the leader. I'm supposed to have it all together."
Mm-hmm.
Well, that really messes with the trust then of that you somewhere in you see asking for help as weakness. And therefore,
Mm-hmm.
how are your people going to be more willing to take risks and need help and be more innovative when they see that needing help is a problem? Or and I just think that's one I shared that I think a lot of times we don't think about as
Yeah.
leaders, that I've seen really impact trust for positive and negative ways between leaders and their people, is be willing to ask your people for help, show them that asking for help is a positive strength, is a good thing.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, it got me thinking about how there's a difference between asking for help and delegating the work, right? Because when you're delegating, you're getting helped in some way because your team is doing the work that needs to be done, and that's helpful and required. But what you're describing is something different and maybe deeper, where it's creating a level of vulnerability and making it safe to be like, I'm struggling here, or I need help here, or I don't know how to do these things, and creating space for that versus I know everything and here's the work that needs to get done. So that feels very different. And I'm wondering if that distinction, if you're if that is true, if that's how you're thinking about it too, based on what you just described.
Yeah, absolutely. And I
Yeah.
think if I can, as it relates to change,
Mm-hmm.
I love the idea of a car. I think we talked about this before,
Mm-hmm.
where a car, it has, and I'm not a mechanic, okay? I'm a speaker, former educator, now writer and speaker. But a car, it has suspension. It has some padding with the brakes. It has, so that when it goes over a speed bump,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't feel like so jarring, right? I
Mm-hmm.
think about this trust we talk about, and building this human connection between the leader and the people. Really, you're making investments so that when change does happen, when there is a big transition in leadership, in the way things are done, in the business model, that's like a vulnerable time for everyone. But if you've built this relationship where there's a suspension there to keep the bump from feeling quite so hard,
Mm-hmm.
people are able to adapt and be resilient so much more easily because there's this thing that's constant. There's this relationship and this trust there that's constant. You're a leader that makes me feel seen, that makes me feel appreciated, that I feel like trusts me with their own vulnerability, their own need for help. That, like, a relationship like that can withstand a lot of bumps, a lot of change. It's a very resilient relationship, but without that certainty, change can feel a lot more threatening, a lot more
Yeah.
scary. And I think you see people act out more, and they just don't have as solid a performance at work, as well as their mental health hurting, which is
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
priority to me as well. When I speak, I mean, really the focus is improving not just mental health at work, but their overall performance. Because we know when our mental health is stronger, we just
Yeah.
perform completely differently, you know?
Yep. And that trust is so important too, because when things are changing, there's a loss of control, or feeling like you don't have control, and knowing that your boss or your leadership team has your back, and is there with you going over those bumps. That can absolutely, I agree with what you're saying, make the bumps less impactful and easier to navigate. What about there were the two other pillars, the I see you, and what was the other one?
I appreciate you.
I
Mhm.
appreciate you. Tell us a little bit about those, and maybe some tips on what leaders can leverage there, especially as it relates to helping themselves or others navigate change in the workplace, or even I'm sure these all apply to personal life as well, but um,
Yeah, truth is truth, right?
totally.
Truth is truth. Yeah. So, pillar one, I see you. We talk about when you see me, when you make me feel seen as human and not just a number. When you see me, I want to follow you.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
going back to that kind of my origin story of when my mental health fell apart at work and that voicemail I shared about, we're going to do this one day, 1 hour, 1 minute at a time. That leader saw me as a human in a very vulnerable state. I didn't just get fired. I didn't, right? It was I'm going to meet you where you're at. I know that there's potential here. I worked with you before and I know that you are struggling and we're going to get you there. And that confidence in me, I mean, I literally was listening under that voicemail, like underneath a blanket on a couch where I was like, I am never getting out from under this blanket. Like my life's over. And what did I do the next day? I got up, I
You
put on
went
my
to work.
mascara while I'm like crying, having so much anxiety. And because when you see me, I want to follow you. Like
Yeah.
I will follow you. Like when you go to bat for me, like I'm gonna follow you anywhere. And there's a lot of ways to make your employees feel seen and your people feel seen in an organization. Some of the ways we talk about is making conversations about them,
Hmm.
giving them credit. Big one that's really simple to implement is calling people by their first name.
Hmm.
As a teacher, I learned that you looked at graphs of kids when you would respond to them with their first name, and the brains just like light up like a Christmas tree. Adults are no
Hmm.
different. We're just big little kids.
Right.
So we talk about that. For I appreciate you. The whole idea is that gratitude begets momentum, and especially post COVID. I mean, we look at the statistics of mental health of employees. Oracle's done some really interesting research where of the employees they surveyed, 78% say that they feel like the pandemic severely impacted their mental health.
Hmm.
53% report struggling with depression, 52% with anxiety, and 32% even with PTSD. So there are
Hmm.
a lot of leaders in the workplace that are wondering, like, is this even my business? Like people's mental health, like this hasn't always been a common thing that we talk about.
Right.
And what I love about the pillar of I appreciate you is that gratitude begets momentum. Gratitude creates healing. And when we
Hmm.
look at those numbers, what we really need is we need a lot of healing from a lot of isolation. Stanford
Hmm.
Medical, also all research based, shows that the way we combat anxiety, depression, even suicide ideations, social connection.
Right.
It's social connection, right? And so the entire keynote of the connected leader, we talk about how do we make them feel seen? How do we make them feel appreciated? I mean, you look at like every religious philosophy, every self-help, almost everything out there, every thought leader teaches the principle of gratitude
Hmm. Hmm.
because of how healing it is to the brain, because it rewires our brain to start looking for things to be grateful for. And so if we look when we look at these numbers, and what I teach leaders is, like, we can't force anyone to be happy, right?
Right.
Like I can't even force myself to be happy some days.
Right.
Happiness isn't your business. It is not your business to make your people happy. That's not your job.
Hmm.
But if we look at the research with Stanford Medical, connection is. Happiness isn't your
Right.
business, connection is.
Right. Right.
So with gratitude, you look at the healing impacts of gratitude and the research based of what it does for people to heal our brains after so much isolation. It is
Hmm.
huge, and that's why it's the middle pillar there. And different ways, we teach different tools of gratitude, different ways to highlight people in your organization.
Hmm.
Uh, we bring back an ICU of making sure it's by name, by first
Yeah.
name,
Yeah.
and how huge that is, how that impacts the brain. It's been fun to as I speak around the US, to hear different ways that companies are doing it, especially post COVID.
Hmm.
They have different programs of how to highlight people. But I mean, honestly, that yes, there are all these different ways you can do it, fun little programs, things you can have on that hall. But like really what it comes down to is there is just something for, it's like it's so simple that we forget it, of just saying thank you to your
Yeah.
people as often as possible.
I was gonna say, I mean, I think it can be that simple, right? Like we don't have to wait for those
It
big
is.
or a program to show gratitude, to build relationships, to acknowledge the people in your space. And, a lot of what you described with the impact of the pandemic, and just, just workplace cultures in general. And then you layer in constant change and pivots and shifts and all these things that are impacting mental health and wellness and our sense of stability, that something as simple as saying, or a check-in, like, hey, are you okay? Calling people, like using their first names, and then also building in those moments of gratitude can create such powerful shifts in the individual's experience in that moment. And which is so important for leaders to think about. And I'll just sort of reinforce why that's so important with kind of what's not happening today. I feel like, I don't feel like, I know, and I see even with the clients that I'm working with, there's a lot of talk about well-being, mental health, wellness in the workplace, and the connection to change and leadership. There's still an old, you talked about this earlier, not asking for help. I think there's still it's going to take some time to experience the shift that needs to take place in organizations, where the structure of, just kind of holding things close to the vest, not showing emotions, not being vulnerable, not asking for help. That's going to take some time, especially with the, like, what, 5 generations of workers in the workplace today. And so, think about, I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing in our young people and our upcoming leaders, because they crave and want more than I think was possible or even thought about, my generation and up. So it's
Oh,
encouraging in that regard.
absolutely. I was just speaking in Maine for a return client actually this past weekend,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't in general speak a lot to teenagers,
Mm-hmm.
but they'd had me up before to speak to their adults, and they said, "Will you come talk to our student leaderships, all the student
Mm-hmm.
councils in the state of Maine?" And I said, "Sure." And I went up, and just like what you just said, I was so encouraged
Mm-hmm.
speaking to these kids and engaging with them and talking to them afterwards. They are so excited to just like engage in the humanity of relationships and
Yeah.
everything they do as student leaders and as the dreams they have for their futures. It is really cool. They see this as really, really important. And
Yeah.
they see their peers struggling. They see how mental health um, is just a priceless commodity. And
Mm-hmm.
I was actually just talking to someone this morning about, they were talking about that it was hard for them to pay for therapy, and I just immediately, I was like, that makes sense. Also, you will make more money when you are more mentally healthy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
there's just no question. And it's the same, I mean, that's the connected leader, like, that's why we talk about this, because at the end of the day, yes, everybody wants their people to be mentally healthy, but also we need to make money, and people perform better and they make you more money when they're more mentally healthy. That's just the
That's, yeah.
truth.
Yeah.
So even if it's just based on a money motivation, which is not a bad motivation, we all money to support our families and our dreams and our goals. Like, it's for that too. That is the outcome that we're looking for and that we see, is when people are more connected, they perform at a higher level.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it absolutely makes sense to me. And I love that you're out there spreading this message and, touching people's hearts and minds in this way, because it's important to continue to talk about over and over and over again. So we can start to see those shifts, because, like I said earlier, we spend so much of our times at work working. And so what a great opportunity to invest in talent in this way, and do what we can to care for the whole person, which includes their mental health, because we know there's a significant ROI, not just financially, but in their adaptability and all the things that they need to be resilient, adaptable,
Mhm.
creative, open-minded. Those things come from being in a healthy mental state, and that supports organizations to continue to change and grow. So really important message. Julie, where can people find you online? Where's the best place to get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more from you? Can you share those links, or where they can go?
Yeah. My website is julieleespeaks.com, and then I'm on LinkedIn and most of the platforms, but you can find everything at julieleespeaks.com.
Fantastic. Is there any other final words of wisdom you'd like to share with the Change Leader Insights community?
I would just say so often we can be overwhelmed by the hard and the things that can possibly go wrong, and I would just say, myself included, as I continue to adapt, to make sure I'm practicing this day to
Mhm.
day. Don't stress about making other people happy. Happiness
Mhm.
isn't your business. Connection, that's where you put your focus. That's where you put your mind, is focusing on the connection piece, and the happiness will in the end, and the success will take care of itself.
I love that. That's a really important takeaway. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you for being on the show. I cannot wait to share this episode. Yeah, have a great rest of your day and keep spreading the good word, Julie. It was nice to chat with you today.
Thanks for having me.